Judge tried to frame a simple maid, not knowing her daughter's a legal prodigy. The courtroom smelled of old wood and fear. Carol Peterson stood behind the defense table in her plain gray dress, hands clasped so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Across the room, Judge Wallace Thompson's gavel hit the block with a sound that made her heart jump. "This court will now come to order," he said, his voice slicing through the murmurs. Carol wasn't a criminal. She was a maid, a woman who scrubbed other people's marble floors until her wrists ached. But today, she was the one on trial, accused of violating a city sanitation law she'd never even heard of. The charge sheet on the table in front of her looked official, stamped with Thompson's own signature. In the gallery, her daughter sat straight-backed, eyes fixed on the bench. Abby looked younger than 17, her notebook balanced on her knees, but her calmness was electric. Carol had begged her not to come. The girl had refused to stay home. The prosecutor, a man with a smile too smooth to be kind, adjusted his tie and began reciting the accusation: illegal waste disposal, public nuisance, negligence. Every word sounded heavier than it should. When he finished, Judge Thompson leaned forward. "Mrs. Peterson," he said, "do you plead guilty or not guilty?" Carol swallowed. "Not guilty, Your Honor. Before she could finish, he interrupted. "You're advised to keep your answers brief. We're not here for excuses." Abby's pencil stilled. Carol's voice faltered. "Yes, sir. Your Honor." The gavel struck again, harder. "You will address this court properly." A ripple of laughter moved through the courtroom, polite and cruel. Carol's cheeks burned. Thompson didn't look at her. He looked past her, at nothing, as if she were a piece of furniture that had spoken out of turn. "Let's proceed," he said. "The city will present its evidence." When the prosecutor began describing a supposed inspection report, Abby's pen flew across her notebook. Something in his words didn't fit. He mentioned a date that didn't match the citation and a location that didn't exist in municipal records. She flipped through her grandfather's law manual in her bag, tracing a line with her finger. Her pulse slowed. She knew exactly what was wrong. The report hadn't been filed properly. The citation hadn't been served according to procedure. The issuing officer, the same one who had signed her mother's summons, had no authority under the ordinance to do so. It wasn't just a mistake. It was a setup. When the prosecutor finished, Judge Thompson leaned back in his chair, feigning boredom. "Well, Mrs. Peterson, what do you have to say for yourself?" Carol turned toward him helplessly. "Your Honor, I've done nothing wrong. I just clean houses. I don't understand these papers." Thompson smirked. "Ignorance of the law is not an excuse." That was when Abby stood up. Her voice was clear, cutting through the murmurs. "Maybe not, Your Honor, but ignorance of the law shouldn't be how the law itself behaves." Every head turned. The judge blinked. "And who are you?" "Abigail Peterson," she said evenly, "the defendant's daughter." "This isn't a debate club, Miss Peterson. Sit down." Abby didn't move. "I intend to, after I make a motion." The silence that followed felt like the air before lightning. Even the stenographer paused. Abby held up the citation, her hand steady. "This summons is invalid. It lacks a written complaint, wasn't served by certified mail or in person, and was signed by Officer Miller, a traffic officer with no jurisdiction over sanitation violations." Thompson's face stiffened. "Where did you learn that?" Abby smiled faintly. "From the same law your court is supposed to follow." The courtroom broke into whispers. The judge's gavel slammed down, but it couldn't silence what had already been said. Carol looked at her daughter with a mix of fear and awe. For the first time, the mighty Judge Thompson looked uncertain. He straightened his robe, his voice colder than before. "Very well. We'll reconvene for a full trial. And, Miss Peterson, bring all your clever little books. I'll be ready." Abby met his stare without blinking. "So will I." Her mother reached for her hand, trembling, and Abby squeezed it once. Outside the courthouse, cameras waited, unaware that the story they'd soon tell wouldn't be about a maid who broke the law, but about a girl who broke the silence. The Petersons' apartment sat above a laundromat, its windows clouded with detergent steam and the scent of soap. The wallpaper peeled at the corners, and the old clock over the stove ticked too loudly in the quiet. Carol sat at the kitchen table, staring at the summons again as if the words might rearrange themselves into mercy. Abby paced beside the counter the way she did when she was solving a problem she couldn't let go of. A pile of open books surrounded her, municipal codes, court procedure guides, and the worn notebooks of her great-grandfather, Sergeant Michael Iron Mike Riley. The old man's handwriting leaned forward on every page, confident and unyielding. Her mother rubbed her temples. "Abby, stop. You've read enough." "No, Mom," Abby said without looking up. "He made a mistake. Or maybe he thought no one would notice. But he didn't count on me." Carol gave a weary laugh. "You're 17. He's a judge." Abby closed one of the books softly. "He's also wrong. That makes us even." She picked up the summons and underlined the date again. This was issued on a Saturday. Government offices were closed. And look at the seal. Crooked, smudged, probably stamped after the fact. Her mother sighed. "What does that matter?" "It matters because people like him think nobody checks." The words landed heavy between them. Abby finally sat down. "Do you remember what Grandpa Mike used to say? Truth's not loud. It just waits for someone brave enough to speak it." Carol reached across the table, brushing the back of her daughter's hand. "He also said bravery and foolishness wear the same shoes sometimes." Abby smiled faintly. "Then I'll walk carefully." She turned back to the pages, flipping through the notebook until she found a line highlighted in blue ink, an old case note about judicial ethics and conflicts of interest. She traced it with her fingertip. "He's done this before, Mom, not to us but to others. I can prove it." Outside, the hum of dryers from the laundromat rose and fell like distant thunder. When the phone rang, Carol nearly jumped. It was Mrs. Perez, another housekeeper who worked for one of the judge's neighbors. "Carol," she whispered, "I heard what happened. Be careful. He's telling people you're unstable, that you stole from him." Carol's breath caught. "That's not true." "I know," Mrs. Perez said, "but he's powerful, and people believe what he says." After she hung up, Carol pressed her forehead to her hands. "He's already starting, Abby. He's going to ruin me." Abby's voice was quiet but steady. "Then we don't give him the ending he wants." Later that night, as her mother slept on the couch, Abby sat at the small kitchen table under the flickering light. The city outside murmured with sirens and wind, but her world had narrowed to pages and purpose. She copied citations, cross-referenced rulings, and highlighted every irregularity she could find. Her pencil moved like a clock hand, relentless. At midnight, she paused. In her notebook, she drew a small scale of justice, perfectly balanced, and wrote beneath it, "For Mom." The next morning, she presented her findings to Carol over burnt toast. We're filing a motion to dismiss." Carol blinked. "We can't afford a lawyer." "We don't need one," Abby said. "We need the law, and we already have it." Her mother looked at her, a mix of fear and pride rising in her chest. "Abby, what if he gets angry?" Abby lifted the folder of documents and tucked it into her backpack. "Then we'll show him what happens when anger meets reason." When they arrived at the courthouse for the preliminary hearing, reporters stood by the steps waiting for a glimpse of the judge. Nobody looked twice at the maid and her daughter climbing the marble stairs, but Abby's eyes burned with quiet certainty. Somewhere behind the tall windows, Wallace Thompson sipped his coffee, unaware that the girl approaching his courtroom wasn't there to be crushed. She was coming to challenge everything he'd built on fear. The second hearing began under brighter lights and colder stares. Judge Thompson sat higher than before, his black robe immaculate, his expression carved in stone. Around him, the air hummed with arrogance, the prosecutor smirking, the clerks whispering, even the bailiff looking bored. Carol stood small beside her daughter, her hands clasped tightly around a folded handkerchief. Thompson tapped his pen once, twice, as if to remind everyone whose room it was. "Mrs. Peterson," he began smoothly, "the city remains firm on its charges. You've been warned before about improper disposal, have you not?" Carol opened her mouth, but Abby spoke first. "Objection!" The word landed like a glass breaking. Every head turned toward her. Thompson's eyes narrowed. "This isn't a television show, Miss Peterson. You don't get to object in my courtroom." Abby didn't flinch. "Then let's call it what it is, a violation of procedure. The record shows my mother has never received any prior notice or complaint." The judge leaned forward, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Oh? And are you her attorney now?" Abby met his stare evenly. "No, sir. Just her daughter. But someone has to remind this court that the law applies to everyone." The murmurs started again, soft, growing, unstoppable. Thompson slammed the gavel once, the crack echoing off the marble walls. "One more outburst like that and I'll hold you in contempt." Abby nodded calmly. "Then I'll be sure my contempt is properly documented." Laughter rippled from the back row before the bailiff silenced it. The prosecutor shuffled his notes, visibly annoyed. "Your Honor," he said quickly, "the city's evidence includes an inspection log from Officer Miller." "Officer Miller?" Abby interrupted. "The same traffic officer whose jurisdiction ends 2 districts away?" The prosecutor blinked. "He was acting under the city's request." "Whose request?" she pressed. "Objection," Thompson barked. "You will not cross-examine the city's counsel." Abby folded her hands neatly in front of her. "I'm sorry, Your Honor. I just thought fairness required equal questioning." For a moment he had no answer. His lips thinned into a hard line. "Enough. The motion to dismiss is denied. This matter will proceed to trial." Carol gasped softly. "Your Honor, please." "Mrs. Peterson," he said sharply, "you've wasted enough of this court's time. Consider this your final warning." When he adjourned, the sound of his gavel felt less like order and more like punishment. As the courtroom emptied, Abby helped her mother gather their papers. "He's angry," Carol whispered. "You made him angry." Abby smiled faintly. "Good. That means he's scared." In the hallway, they were stopped by a man in a tan trench coat carrying a press badge. "Ben Carter," he said, extending a hand. "Local reporter. I've been covering Thompson's cases for years. That was gutsy in there." Abby looked at him warily. He'll just call me a child who doesn't know better." "Maybe," Ben said, "or maybe people are ready to see who he really is. Call me if you decide you want a story told." He slipped her his card and walked away. That night, Abby sat on the edge of her bed, replaying the hearing in her mind, the laughter, the contempt, the cold certainty in Thompson's eyes. She'd rattled him, but not enough. He still believed the world belonged to men like him, to titles and signatures and lies wrapped in legal language. She opened her great-grandfather's notebook again. On one of the last pages, he had written, "Power isn't about who speaks the loudest. It's about who refuses to be silent." She ran her thumb over the ink and whispered, "I hear you, Grandpa." From the living room came her mother's quiet sobs, muffled by exhaustion. Abby rose, crossed the apartment, and covered Carol with a blanket. "Sleep, Mom," she said softly. "Tomorrow I'll make him listen." Outside, the street lights flickered over cracked sidewalks and rusted fire escapes. Somewhere in the distance, sirens wailed, a city full of noise, yet somehow deaf to truth. Abby looked out the window, her reflection small against the glass, but her eyes burning with resolve. The judge thought this was just about a fine, a case he could bury under paperwork. He didn't know he'd already started his own trial. Rain fell steady and cold the next morning, tapping on the courthouse steps like a warning drum. Abby sat by the window with her notebook open, the pages covered in underlined laws and scribbled arguments. Carol watched her in silence, clutching a chipped mug of coffee. There was something in her daughter's eyes that frightened her, a calmness too sharp for someone her age. "You don't have to do this," Carol said quietly. "He's a judge. You can't win against people like him." Abby didn't look up. "Then I'll make it so he never wins against people like us again." Her voice was soft, but it carried weight. That afternoon, Abby took the train across town to the university library, a place she wasn't supposed to be in, but where she always found belonging. The security guard recognized her by now. He just nodded and let her in. She headed straight to the law archives, rows of dusty case files and microfilm reels humming under old fluorescent lights. Hours passed. The rain stopped. One by one, patterns began to appear. She found records of prior rulings by Judge Thompson, evictions, foreclosures, land seizures, dozens of cases where low-income families had lost everything over minor code violations. She highlighted a name, the Daniels estate, and another, Foster v. City. The same attorney, the same developer, the same rubber-stamped orders signed by Thompson. She copied every one of them. In the last file, a black and white photo slipped out. A man standing beside a newly built complex, hand extended in triumph. The caption read, "Developer Wallace Thompson Sr. opens new luxury district on former farmland." Her breath caught. She turned the photo over. Faded ink in the corner read, "Dedicated to my son Wallace Jr., who will protect what we've built." Abby's hand shook as she flipped through more documents. It was all there, the pattern, the inheritance of greed, dressed in robes of authority. Back home, she spread everything across the table. Her mother's tired eyes widened as she saw the evidence piling up. "Abby, where did you get all this?" "From public records," she said, almost smiling. "Turns out corruption has terrible handwriting." Carol frowned. "But even if it's true, no one will believe us." "Not yet," Abby replied. "But someone will. I'll find them." She picked up the phone and dialed the number on the card Ben Carter had given her. He answered on the second ring. "Carter, speaking." "It's Abby Peterson," she said. "I have something you'll want to see." The next day, they met at a diner downtown. Abby laid the documents on the table while Carter read silently, his eyes narrowing with every page. "You're telling me Thompson's family owns the development company that benefits from his rulings?" "Yes," Abby said, "and he's using the court to clear land for them." Carter whistled low. "You realize this could take him down?" Abby looked out the window at the courthouse across the street. "I'm counting on it." But she also knew Thompson wouldn't go quietly. That night, she received a letter slipped under their apartment door. No envelope, just a single page. "You're playing a dangerous game, Miss Peterson. Your great-grandfather wasn't as noble as you think." Her heart pounded as she read it again. Someone knew she'd been digging. She searched through her great-grandfather's notebooks until she found a section torn at the edge, a single entry dated 1952, war-era handwriting faint and uneven. "Court-martial dismissed, charges fabricated, truth buried." She whispered, "They're using him against us." Carol appeared behind her, worry etched across her face. "What's wrong?" Abby handed her the letter. "They're trying to make me afraid." Carol's voice broke. "Please stop this, Abby. You're still a child." Abby looked at her mother with a quiet strength that no longer belonged to a child. "Maybe that's why I can do it. Adults keep making peace with monsters. I won't." Outside, thunder rolled again. The storm was returning, and this time she would walk straight into it. The courthouse lobby buzzed with a predator's kind of quiet. Suits walking too fast, whispers carried just far enough to bruise. Abby tightened the strap of her backpack and felt the familiar press of her grandfather's notebook against her spine. Carol hovered beside her, twisting the corner of her scarf until the thread threatened to split. They were early. Good. She needed the room to see them arrive without flinching. Inside, Judge Thompson's courtroom smelled of lemon polish and old victories. The prosecutor arranged his files like trophies. The bailiff refused to meet Carol's eyes. Abby set her folder on the table, opened it, and breathed. When the case was called, Thompson regarded them with theatrical boredom. "Mrs. Peterson," he said, "we'll dispense with theatrics today. The city is prepared to proceed." Abby stood. "Before anything proceeds, Your Honor, I'm filing a motion." She stepped forward and handed copies to the clerk and the prosecutor. "Motion to recuse for cause." The word landed like a dropped plate. The prosecutor blinked. Thompson's eyebrows barely moved, but something old and mean flickered in his eyes. "On what basis?" he asked, voice carefully flat. "Does a teenager presume to instruct this court?" "On the basis that the law is not age-restricted," Abby said, "and on the basis of documented bias and conflicts of interest." Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Wallace Thompson, Sr. is the principal financier of White Ridge Development. Over the past 5 years, Your Honor has presided over 37 cases that cleared properties later acquired by White Ridge. In at least 12 of those, you signed ex parte orders within 48 hours of filings. 3 were filed on weekends when the clerk's office was closed. A murmur rolled through the gallery. Thompson's gavel cracked the air. Silence. Abby didn't look away. Additionally, the citation against my mother was signed by a traffic officer outside his jurisdiction. I submit GPS logs from his patrol car showing he was 2 miles away at the recorded time. The seal on the summons is misaligned and inconsistent with the clerk's stamp used that week. and the inspection report references a sanitation code repealed 18 months ago. The prosecutor lunged for indignation and came up with nothing. "Your Honor, this is—" "Evidence?" Abby offered. "It is." Thompson leaned forward, hands tented, voice soft enough to bruise. "Miss Peterson, I could hold you in contempt." She nodded once. "You could. Or you could read the statute that says you must step down when a reasonable person would question your impartiality. I am a reasonable person, and I am questioning." Silence, the kind that tests walls. From the last row, a camera shutter clicked once. Ben Carter had slipped in without announcement and now watched like a man tracking the first tremor before a collapse. Thompson looked to the prosecutor, found no anchor there, and returned to the girl. "You think you understand the gravity of what you're alleging?" "I understand the gravity of what you've been doing," Abby said. "If the motion is denied, I'll file a complaint with the Judicial Conduct Commission and deliver these exhibits to the press. If it's granted, we can try this case in front of a judge who doesn't share a last name with the beneficiary." The gavel hovered and did not fall. Thompson's jaw worked, a grind of teeth against pride. At length he said, "The motion is taken under advisement. We will recess for 20 minutes. He stood too fast and vanished through his chamber door. Carol sat down hard, breath shaking. "Abby, it's okay," Abby whispered, though her hands were not entirely steady. She tucked a stray hair behind her ear and faced forward, as if the bench were already occupied by someone else. Ben slid into the aisle seat nearest them and kept his voice low. "You just pulled the pin on a very expensive grenade." Abby's eyes never left the empty bench. "Good. Maybe the city will finally hear it." The bailiff announced the judge's return. Thompson took the bench with his robe sitting wrong on his shoulders, as though it had gained weight in the back room. He shuffled papers that didn't need shuffling and read from a page he had not had time to write. "This court," he said, each word measured, "will transfer the matter of City v. Peterson for reassignment. A new judge will be appointed. Further, the city will review the integrity of the citation." He paused, then forced the last sentence through his teeth. "Defendant may remain on her own recognizance. No further proceedings today." Abby felt the air leave her chest in one clean rush. Carol's hand found hers under the table, clasping, grateful, disbelieving. Thompson stared at them as if he could will them into smaller versions of themselves. Abby met the look with something he couldn't file, stamp, or silence. On their way out, the prosecutor touched his tie and pretended to be late for somewhere else. Ben waited on the steps with the rain just beginning again, pen poised. "Do you want to comment?" Abby glanced at her mother, then back at the courthouse doors. "Not yet," she said. "Let the new judge speak first." She lifted her face to the rain and let it hit like a promise. The storm was here, yes, but it was choosing sides. The storm had passed, but the air still smelled like wet stone and justice waiting to be written. Inside the newly assigned courtroom, sunlight slanted through high windows onto Judge Esther Friedman's bench. She was known for her precision, her quiet authority, and the fact that no one, not even a district attorney, dared interrupt her once she began to speak. Carol sat trembling in her chair. Abby stood beside her, wearing her one good blazer, borrowed from a neighbor and too big at the shoulders. Her backpack lay at her feet, stuffed with every page of evidence she'd spent nights compiling. The bailiff called the room to order. Judge Friedman adjusted her glasses and glanced at the file. City of Brookdale versus Carol Peterson. Miss Peterson, I understand you'll be representing your mother? Yes, Your Honor, Abby said. Her voice was soft, but it carried all the way to the back of the room. Very well, Friedman said, eyeing her curiously. You may proceed. Abby took a breath and walked to the front. Your Honor, I intend to show that this citation was not a mistake. It was an abuse of power. The previous presiding judge, Wallace Thompson, had a direct conflict of interest in every case involving properties owned by White Ridge Development. My mother's case is part of that pattern. A murmur swept through the gallery. Reporters filled the back row, Ben Carter among them, pens poised. The prosecutor stood. Objection, Your Honor. These allegations are irrelevant to the charge. Judge Friedman raised a hand. Sit down, Mr. Hollis. I'll decide what's relevant. Abby opened her folder and handed the clerk a set of documents. Exhibit A, GPS data from Officer Miller's patrol car. He never visited the property at the time of the alleged violation. Exhibit B, inspection report signed after business hours. Exhibit C, correspondence between Judge Thompson and White Ridge executives recovered through public record requests. The clerk passed the papers to the judge. Silence stretched while Friedman read. Every sound, the shifting of chairs, the creak of old wood, felt magnified. Finally, Friedman looked up. Miss Peterson, where did you get this? They were public, Abby said, just hidden where no one bothered to look. The judge's eyes softened for a heartbeat, then hardened again. Proceed. Abby turned to the witness stand. Officer Miller, would you please take the stand? The officer walked forward, his polished shoes scuffing the tile. His confidence evaporated under Abby's calm stare. Officer Miller, she began, where were you at 3:42 p.m. on May 8th? He cleared his throat. Patrolling Main Street. Would you read the location data from your car's GPS that day? He hesitated. Looks like Elm Avenue. That's 2 miles from my mother's address, correct? Yes, but so you didn't see her dispose of any waste? No, Then you signed a report without witnessing the violation? The courtroom erupted in whispers. Judge Friedman's gavel fell once, restoring order. Answer the question, officer. I was told to, he said finally. By whom? He swallowed. Judge Thompson's clerk. Abby nodded, her tone steady. No further questions. The silence that followed was thick and electric. Friedman leaned back, eyes sharp as glass. This court has heard enough. She turned to the prosecutor. Mr. Hollis, do you wish to continue? The man's voice faltered. No, Your Honor. Friedman exhaled through her nose, deliberate and calm. Then let the record show. The citation is invalid, the charges dismissed with prejudice. She paused, looking down over her glasses at the stunned courtroom. Furthermore, transcripts from the prior proceedings will be forwarded to the State Judicial Commission for review. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Abby closed her notebook, heart pounding in her throat. Friedman's gaze softened as she addressed her. Miss Peterson, the law could use people like you. Abby smiled faintly. Thank you, Your Honor. The law already had one. My great-grandfather. I'm just finishing what he started. A few quiet claps rose from the back, spreading into applause before the bailiff restored silence. When the gavel fell one last time, it didn't sound like punishment. It sounded like freedom. Outside, flashes from cameras burst against the courthouse steps. Reporters shouted questions. But Abby only took her mother's hand and led her through the crowd. "It's over, Mom," she whispered. "He can't hurt us any more." Above them, the clouds broke apart, spilling sunlight on the marble pillars. For the first time in months, Carol let herself believe the world could be fair again. And behind them, in a corner window of the courthouse, Judge Wallace Thompson watched from the shadows, his empire of fear collapsing one truth at a time. The headlines hit the morning after the verdict like thunder. Teen legal prodigy destroys corrupt judge in courtroom showdown. The photo beneath it showed Abby walking out of the courthouse, hand in hand with her mother, both faces lit by the kind of quiet triumph the world rarely sees. By noon, every network wanted an interview. Ben Carter's article spread faster than anyone expected, quoting Abby's line, "Ignorance of the law shouldn't be how the law itself behaves." It became a rallying cry across the city, but inside his private office, Judge Wallace Thompson sat alone. His desk, once polished, immaculate, powerful, was covered in letters demanding his resignation. The state commission had launched a full investigation. Every old ruling, every sealed file was being reopened. He stared at his reflection in the darkened window, the gavel beside him like a dead weight. For the first time, the robe on his shoulders felt like a shroud. His phone buzzed, a single message from his clerk. "They've taken your cases, the hearing's at noon." He didn't reply. When he arrived at the courthouse later that day, reporters swarmed. Cameras flashed like lightning. "Judge Thompson, any comment on the allegations?" "Is it true your family profited from illegal land deals?" "Are you resigning?" He tried to walk through them with the same cold dignity he'd worn all his life, but something inside him broke with every click of a camera shutter. The man who'd once silenced entire courtrooms couldn't silence a single voice now. Inside, he took his seat at the witness table instead of the bench. The reversal was total. Judge Friedman presided over the hearing, calm and unyielding. "Mr. Thompson," she began, "you stand accused of judicial misconduct, conflict of interest, and abuse of authority. Do you have anything to say in your defense?" He looked up, eyes hollow. "No, Your Honor." In the gallery, Abby sat quietly beside Ben Carter and Carol. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She only watched as the man who'd tried to destroy her mother finally faced what he'd earned. When the board announced its ruling, temporary suspension pending investigation, all prior cases subject to review, the courtroom erupted with noise. Thompson stood, pale, shaking, his voice cracked. "Do you think this changes anything?" He spat, eyes on Abby. "There will always be people like me." Abby rose slowly. "Then there will always be people like me to stop you." The silence that followed was louder than any applause. Thompson's composure crumbled. He turned away, shoulders hunched, and left the courtroom through a side door. The robe he'd worn for 20 years dragged behind him, heavy and meaningless. Outside, Carol took a trembling breath, tears streaking her cheeks. "It's over," she whispered. Abby shook her head. "No, Mom, it's just beginning." Ben raised his camera and captured the moment. The simple maid and her daughter, standing beneath the same courthouse that once tried to break them. That evening, news anchors spoke of reform. Politicians promised inquiries, and citizens flooded social media demanding transparency. But in a small apartment above a laundromat, Carol and Abby sat quietly at their kitchen table, the same one where the fight had begun. The tea was warm, the world finally calm. "Are you proud of yourself?" Carol asked softly. Abby smiled. "I'm proud of us." In a box on the counter, her great-grandfather's notebooks rested beside the court transcripts. The legacy had come full circle. Truth reclaimed, not through power, but through persistence. In the courthouse's empty hallway, Judge Thompson's nameplate hung crooked, its letters barely clinging to the brass frame. Justice had been late, but it had come anyway. Weeks passed, and the city began to breathe differently. The courthouse, that had once carried the weight of fear, now felt lighter, its marble halls echoing with voices that dared to speak again. Judge Thompson's name was removed from the roster, replaced by a small brass plate that simply read, "Vacant bench. Pending appointment." In a quiet ceremony, the Judicial Ethics Commission released its final report. The words were brief but damning. Gross abuse of power, conflict of interest, violation of judicial oath. His career ended not with applause, but with a line in a document, one that would be studied for decades. Abby read it over breakfast, her spoon clinking softly against her cereal bowl. "It's done," she said. Carol smiled, tired but radiant. "It's really done." Ben Carter's story had been nominated for a state journalism award, but he kept saying the real honor was seeing a maid and her daughter walk free. He stopped by that afternoon, bringing a small gift, an old, framed photograph. It was Sergeant Mike Riley, Abby's great-grandfather, standing outside a courthouse in his lawyer's suit, not his uniform. Someone had scrawled a note on the back, "Truth's job is never finished." Abby held it in her hands for a long time. "He fought with words," she whispered. "I guess I inherited more than his notebooks." That spring, a letter arrived from the dean of Jefferson University. It was printed on thick cream paper, embossed in gold. Abby opened it at the kitchen table while her mother watched anxiously. She didn't speak at first, just smiled wider and wider until the tears came. "Full scholarship," she finally managed to say. "Pre-law program. They said my hearing transcript was inspiring." Carol laughed through her tears. "He tried to break you, and you turned it into your beginning." "I just gave the truth a microphone," Abby said. The apartment above the laundromat soon filled with boxes of textbooks and second-hand furniture. Carol kept her cleaning jobs, but no longer in fear. She chose her clients now, her name spoken with respect. In the evenings, she cooked late dinners for the two of them, the clatter of pans mixing with Abby's soft hum as she studied. On the night before Abby left for college, they went to the courthouse one last time. The building was empty, its lights dimmed. Abby stood in front of the marble steps where her story had begun. "You know," she said, "he thought this place belonged to him." Carol smiled faintly. "Maybe it always belonged to people like you." Abby looked up at the engraved words above the door. "In justice we trust." For the first time, she believed them. As they turned to leave, dawn broke over the city, washing the courthouse in gold. Abby carried her great-grandfather's photograph under one arm and her mother's hand in the other. Some legacies are born from power. Others are born from courage. And sometimes the difference between the two is just a girl who refuses to sit down.